Good morning. It's Friday. My name's Garland Nixon, and Jody Brar is not with us this week, but we have a brilliant revolutionary businessman, author, and Jody Brar's father, Harpal Brar. Let's talk. Well, as we say in America, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I've gotten tremendous positive response from having Jody on every Friday when she's available. This week we're going to have her father on. I'm very pleased. He's written a number of books. He's an international businessman. He's a revolutionary thinker and philosopher. Harpal Brar. Harpal, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to come on my humble YouTube channel.
Pleasure, Garland.
So let's start, with the Middle East. Before we're going to get into a lot of things, but let me start by just throwing it out there. As you know, the UK and the US launched some attacks last night on the Yemen and the Yemen Ansar Allah group in the Red Sea. We've heard some responses. What are your thoughts on that attack last night?
Well, it was very much in the coming Garland, because the Houthis are doing their best, and praise be to them, to cut supplies out to Israel, which is waging a genocidal war against the people of Gaza. So imperialism either had to overlook it and look very weak, or had to attack. So it's something that doesn't come to me as a surprise. But of course, all the same, it's a predatory attack on a people who cannot answer them with the same weaponry. But I'm sure that they've got plenty in their up their sleeve, and they'll be surprising the imperialists, as indeed they have surprised their various other opponents in the last 7 years.
You know, one of the things that I've been reading lately, as I told you, People's War, People's Army, or I may have that backwards, People's Army, People's War. That was General Diop, the famous Vietnamese general who defeated the French imperialism. And I thought about the resistance forces in the Middle East, and one of the things that I really stood out to me was General Diop's concept of, when you're fighting an adversary with severe firepower, that the way to win it is a long war. And when I see the attack last night, I see, okay, we're going to punch them, the Ansar Allah, and we're going to show them that we're tough. But resistance to imperialism is a long-term effort, and I don't see where that is going to be of great concern to the resistance forces. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, obviously it's a matter of concern, but they are determined to put up resistance. Garland, people don't live up in the skies. What the imperialists are good at is bombing women and children and defenseless people from a height of 3-4 miles, or even sitting somewhere in Washington or New York or some army base, like playing a computer game. But in order to win against anybody, they have to put boots on the ground. And as soon as they do it, they cannot win. Since the Second World War, apart from the war that the president at the time waged against tiny Grenada, they have never won a single war. They lost in Korea, they lost in Vietnam, they lost in Afghanistan, they lost in Iraq, and they will lose everywhere else. They will not win. But of course, what they do is they wreak terrible destruction and terrible punishment on the people who oppose them. But I'm afraid there's no way other than that other than that of resistance for the people to win against imperialism. Lot of price has to be paid, and those who are not willing to pay the price will not win. That means they'll live in perpetual slavery rather than achieving their liberation.
Something that you've written extensively on, you've lectured extensively on, and that's Zionism. And you wrote recently there were people in Washington, excuse me, in London, who were, arrested just for handing out some of the literature that you have authored. Talk to our audience about what you've written about your concept, your thoughts on Zionism, and particularly in the context of what's going on now in the Middle East with this battle.
First of all, Zionism is not a Jewish enterprise. It's an imperialist enterprise. Zionism is a reactionary, racist, anti-Semitic, and reactionary tool of imperialism. I wrote a small pamphlet, only about 100 pages. And this is the pamphlet that our comrades were selling at a big demonstration in London, where they were arrested and kept overnight in a police cell for 24 hours. And it's the weakness of imperialism that they cannot allow you to express your views. Everything that is in that pamphlet is historically true. What's more, it was accepted by everybody until about 30 years ago that was the truth. And most of the sources that I rely on are Jewish sources, like your compatriot Lenny Brenner. And there are others who are actually Zionists, who have given details of what the Zionists were. So it's an ideology which has got a lot in common with fascism, because what it says is Jews do not belong to Germany. Jews' homeland is in Palestine. Why? Because God gave Palestine to the Jews. Now, this is all myth making. Nobody has seen God give anything to anybody, to the Muslims or Christians or Muslims. It's an ideology which arose out of anti-Semitism, whereby Jews for a whole millennia were oppressed in Europe. And of course, the answer to that was to join with other people who were also oppressed and fight against the oppressors. And at the time, the Zionists did not want to accept that. Their idea was the only way Jews could ever be safe would be to have a homeland of their own. And of course, this is something that fitted the Nazi ideology. Nazis also believed that the Jews did not belong to Germany or anywhere else, and they had to go. So because of this convergence of views on their part, this of course led for a number of years after the coming to power of the Nazis, laid the basis for collaboration between the Zionists and the Nazis. And that collaboration did not end till 1938. And the Zionists regard assimilationism as the biggest danger to them. They don't regard Nazism or fascism as being a danger to them. The danger to them is assimilationism. And when Hitler came to power, they greeted with joy his coming to power, because now they said it puts paid to the secular Zionist ideology of collaborating with other people and assimilating. Jews were very assimilated in Germany. Jews were the only places where they were not assimilated was the Tsarist Empire, which at the time included Poland as well. And so from the oppression, you can either fight against oppression by joining with working class people, or you can be a separatist. The Zionists chose separatism, and this separatism is what laid the basis for Zionist ideology. And the sick thing about that is 1917, the October Revolution freed the Jews of Russia in every possible way. Literally overnight, they got all their political, civil, and social rights. In fact, people of Jewish origin were very, very disproportionately represented in the Bolshevik Party, in the Bolshevik Central Committee, in the Bolshevik Politburo, people of Jewish origin. And they did away with that. And precisely because of that, majority of the Jews in the world, overwhelming majority, didn't want a separate homeland. They didn't want to go with Zionism. And there were special circumstances under which they were able to do that. But this project of Zionizing Judaism, which is a religion, which has got nothing to do with the political ideology of Zionism, British imperialism was the first one to start the ball rolling. They recognized that in Palestine, they did not, unlike the Catholics and the Orthodox Russian Church, they did not have any representatives. Palestine was very important, not only as a religious place, which was, common to Muslims, Christians, and Jews, but also it was at the hub of the route to India, which was really the jewel in the crown. It was the most important British colony, and they wanted there somebody who will protect them. And this became particularly important with the coming into being of steam shipping, which required coal for being powered. And they needed coaling stations all across in Aden, hence the Aden colony, this in southern Yemen, and they encouraged Jews to have that ideology, but they didn't really succeed. Britain did everything possible that it could to Zionism, the West European Jews. It didn't succeed, so they turned their attention to Russia, and they sent a special missionary by the name of Wilhelm Hassler. And Hassler went to Russia and met the predecessors of Harpal, who had written about Jews wanting to should have a separate homeland. And one of them was Leo Pinsker. And Hassler meets Leo Pinsker, and having met him, he said, I read your pamphlet, auto-emancipation. Haven't you forgotten one thing? So Pinsker said, what? You've forgotten to put in it that God gave this land, he promised this land to the Jews, and only to the Jews and nobody else. And then Hassler moved to Vienna. That is where he struck up a rapport with Harpal, who was a Hungarian Jew. He was a journalist. He was at the time in Vienna. And Harpal wrote his book, The Jewish State, Judenstaat, in which he expresses the view that Jews could never be safe. He was very depressed by the trial of a very famous former army officer in the French army of Jewish origin called Dreyfus. And Dreyfus was tried for treason. It was a rigged up trial. He was sent to prison, and there was a lot of agitation, not by Jews alone, but by the French proletariat. He was released from jail. And instead of taking the lesson that the emancipation of Jews could only come through the unity of and collaboration between Jewish and non-Jewish proletarians, Harpal was of the view that the Jews must have a separate homeland. But Harpal was not religious. He regarded religion as a con to fool the people. He was not particularly keen on Palestine. He would have any place. One of the places he would have is Uganda. The Ugandans are very fortunate that that place was not chosen. He was prepared to have somewhere in Latin America. But in the end, the Zionists were able to fix on Palestine. But the first World Zionist Conference, and this is really the contribution of Harpal, he didn't put forward any new ideas that hadn't been put forward by Pinsker and company. He organized the Zionist Congress that met in Vienna in 1897. Since then, the Zionists have a conference once a year. And that conference did not agree to have Palestine as the place where the homeland of the Jews would be settled. And Hassler was very disappointed as a result. It's only later on that Palestine was brought into the picture. But the people who were very much behind that were the British. It's British imperialism that really is the chief culprit in Zionizing the religion of Judaism. And if you like, Judaizing Zionism and conflating the two as though if you're a Jew, you're automatically a Zionist, or if you're a Zionist, you're automatically a Jew. In fact, to begin with, and even now, the majority of the Zionists are not Jews. As you know, in your own country, the evangelicals are Zionists, and they support Zionism to the hilt, even if their convoluted ideology says, well, because the Bible says you must convert the Jews to Christianity, you must take them to Israel, and on the day of the judgment, some of them would be redeemed, and who don't convert would be destroyed. That is the philosophy. Hardly an incentive for the Jews to go to Palestine. So that is really what was happening. And even long before Herzl, long before Haschler, there were people, very prominent British from earlier on, like Lord Shaftesbury, Lord Palmerston, who was for years the Foreign Secretary of Britain, a big imperialist, and who was Prime Minister also for 4 or 5 years. They were pushing this ideology. But here, religious obscurantism is mixed with imperial interest. They couldn't give a damn about the Jews. They couldn't give a damn about their religion. All they cared was how they could actually use the Jews as an instrument for controlling the Middle East. And it becomes more important as oil is discovered at the beginning of the, if you like, the 20th century, when the ships then changed over from coal to oil. So oil is very important, has become very important as the staple diet of industry as well as of imperialist war machines. So that was the significance of Middle East, and that is where the Jews came in handy. And once the state of Israel was established through a number of developments, it actually has been a dagger at the heart of the revolutionary democratic movement in the Middle East. It's a means for suppressing the people in that area. And the people who are putting up resistance mainly have been the non-state actors, whether it's the Palestinians or whether it is the residents of Yemen or whatever. I mean, Israel has suffered defeats at the hands of the Palestinians continuously on a number of occasions. In 2006, the Israelis launched a big attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. And after 34 days, they had to retreat because they could not win. It was the first defeat inflicted in a major way by the Arab people, in this case, the Lebanese Hezbollah, who have, of course, now close relations with the Palestinian resistance. And they are still wanting to have a war against Hezbollah. And if they do that, they will fare no better than they did in 2006. The Israelis have been bombing Gaza. They've killed 23,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, because in the eyes of these racist Zionists, every Palestinian, even if he's a child or she's a child, is a future terrorist. That's how they describe them. So better to kill them. They sometimes kill pregnant women because they say for one bullet, you get two at the same time. They are totally heartless. They are totally immoral. They are indecent. They are without any morality. They should be shunned. And what the Gaza operation is doing is, for the first time, and thank the South Africans that they brought a case against them for conducting a genocidal war before the International Court of Justice. We do not know what the decision of that court would be. But whatever it is, from now on, the name of Zionism would be equated with murderous genocides. They will never be able to wash that away. That was something that will stay with them. And that's why it's so important to get prominent Jewish people, progressive people who are denouncing Israeli actions, particularly your compatriots like Max Blumenthal, or even Professor John Mearsheimer, Scott Ritter, and there are prominent Americans who are doing that. I wish there were so many prominent British people who were doing it, but most of the British politicians, whether they're in the Labour Party or the Tory Party, they're cowardly scoundrels. They don't even deserve to be called Democrats because they're not Democrats. They want to suppress anything. In our parliament, a law has been passed against the BDS movement. You can't say boycott Israel. You can't say divest from Israel. You can't say sanction Israel because it's being made impossible. They can't win the argument, so they're trying to suppress it, like they suppress my party's literature. The pamphlet that I wrote, they regard it, obviously, it's a potent weapon. They have all the weaponry. I mean, the next thing they probably do is bomb our houses. They raided our comrades' houses 3 o'clock in the morning. One of our comrades who was arrested is a 16-year-old, very bright young man. So they don't spare anybody. If you can't win an argument, you try and shut people's mouths up. But I'm afraid increasingly people will open their mouths. It is becoming clear to them what imperialism does. They're not learning imperialism because they have read Lenin's book on imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, or they've read any of the things that other people have written. They're learning it because practiced life is showing to them what imperialism is. It's a bloodthirsty system which has been drenching the blood of humanity for 100 years. And that's what these fights are teaching people.
Let me ask you this. I felt that it was important symbolically, number one, but I felt that it was important not just the case that South Africa brought, because I watched some of it and they did a stellar job of presenting the evidence, but also because of the historical context, whereas South Africa is a former apartheid and they suffered from colonialism and imperialism, and they're the ones that are pushing back against imperialism today. Your thoughts about the case that they brought, your thoughts about the importance of South Africa, the symbolism, etc., being the point on this pushback against the Zionist colony.
There are a number of points of significance about this case. First of all, I'm glad that some country has stood up and called Zionism what it is. It's a genocidal, murderous regime, and they were able to do that. I'm very pleased that it was done by South Africa, because hitherto the racist thinking in imperialist countries is that the Africans are unfit to do anything. They're not intellectually accomplished. In fact, this 80 or 85 pages case that was put forward by the South African representatives before the International Court of Justice is so meticulous, so detailed, and so backed up by evidence that actually the Zionists, who are supposed to be appearing sometimes later today before the ICJ, would have difficulty answering anything. They will come up with the usual tropes. It's anti-Semitic, it's this, that, and the other, but it will not wash, because people have actually, anyone who is now called anti-Semitic by the Zionists is almost somebody who can wear it as a badge of honor, because it's just a slur. It means absolutely nothing. Thirdly, they did it as a teamwork. They had 3 or 4 or 5 people who took their turn, and each brilliantly took his part. It's like really a Shakespearean play performed with meticulous attention to detail. And one had to listen to it. I listened to some of it. It's very, very impressive indeed. And in fact, really, in many ways, Africa is showing the way. When it came to voting in the United Nations, whether you wanted a ceasefire or not, or whether it was a matter of Ukraine, little countries like Eritrea stood up to be counted, when big countries, many of them really just either abstained or were not to be seen there. So it's very, very good that the South Africans are bringing this to the light of the day. It's no longer a case of regarding Jews as victims. The fact of the matter is, history has changed. Jews no longer in the world are oppressed people. In fact, the Zionists cultivate an aura of victimhood. They bring in the millennia of oppression. They bring in the Holocaust. Hitler killed 6 million Jews, which is a dastardly, unforgivable act. It was a criminal act, and the whole world condemns Nazism. But today, that Holocaust memory is being used by the Zionists to actually perpetrate their own Holocaust against the Palestinian people. Hardly a day goes by without the Zionists killing 200 or 300 women and children and some, men. But they have not been able to achieve any of their aims. Their aims were, one, to actually finish off Hamas, destroy Hamas, and secondly, to get some of the prisoners, the people who were detained by Hamas and the other resistance groups since October the 17th, when they made a spectacular raid into southern Israel and surprised the Israeli army, the Israeli intelligence services, and the Israeli government. It was something that they were thought of incapable of doing. And the whole world, friends and foes, were absolutely surprised. And Zionism has actually been reeling under that hammer blow. And what they're doing now is not a carefully thought out plan of destruction. It is just revenge seeking. Of course, they've always wanted to cleanse the whole of historic Palestine of the Palestinian people. They have succeeded considerably because they expelled 750,000 people in 1948 from their homes and their land and everything. And then they expelled some more after the Six-Day War in 1967. But the Palestinians have learned their lesson. They're not going anywhere. They belong to Palestine. They've got nowhere to go. Heck of a lot of people of Jewish origin who are in Israel, they have dual nationality. They got passports. They don't want to live there among the Middle Eastern Arabs. They can go anytime they like to. The Palestinians have said they're willing to live and share their land with people of Jewish origin as long as they live on an equal basis with the Arabs and not oppress them. So South Africa, in my view, deserves a tremendous gratitude on behalf of the oppressed people, not just Palestinians, but everybody. I mean, during the apartheid days, Zionism helped the white racists in South Africa to the hilt. They did everything possible against them. Every one of them called Mandela a terrorist. Mandela has become now an icon. Mandela has become a saint. It's very difficult to say anything against Mandela. Even a mild criticism is not tolerated, even by the imperialists, who are trying to use him now and enlist his memory in the service of their predatory wars. But it will not work. It won't wash with anybody. And of course, any Jew who speaks against the Zionists is called a self-hating Jew. Well, so be it. I applaud the self-hating Jews if that's what they are. They're not self-hating Jews. They're very proud of being Jewish, but they do not want, as Jews, to be actually associated with the murderous activities of the Zionists and their imperialist backers. And imperialism, and another thing that this case that was brought by South Africa does is it exposes even more clearly than was the case before they brought the case of American complicity in and the general Western complicity with the genocide being committed by the Zionists in Gaza. Because if you ever heard the American spokespersons like Admiral Kirby on television saying, well, the South African case is baseless. Does he know what baseless means? It means it's without substance. In fact, the scholars who have studied the subject say South Africa's case has got tremendous merits and it's impeccable and difficult to answer. So it just will show people that America is not the land of the free and the land of the brave. It's a land of cowards and imperialist plunderers and brigands. They are incapable of fighting. Hamas fights to the death because it's fighting a just war against an unjust oppression, occupation, and aggression. The imperialist soldiers, including their underlings, like the Israeli army of occupation, cannot fight because they want to save their life. When you go into the battle, if you haven't got the conviction, if you don't believe you're on the right side of history, if you don't believe that you're fighting for a just cause in a just war, then all you want to do is serve out the time so you can live to tell the story that you went there and you came out alive. And that's why the Israelis have withdrawn something like 5 or 6 brigades from Gaza, including their prized Golani brigade, which is supposed to be the most proficient and most fierce brigade. They've withdrawn them and they say it's for recuperation. It's not for recuperation. It's not getting anywhere there. And the Hamas and the other resistance groups, they come in the middle of the bullets and they put a bomb under an Israeli tank and walk away while the bomb explodes along with it. Of course, the tank, which is smashed, and its crew. So that's really the significance to me, what South Africans have done. I have lately been very critical of the South Africans for various reasons, but I have come to admire them for what they've done in this case.
Let me ask you this. Let's add because, I'll put it to you like this. One of the things that I posited a while back is that that U.S. imperialism is at war with the world, is at war with modernity, in that the world, the modern world, is changing, that various powers are rising. There's revolutions going on here and there. The Chinese have been very successful, et cetera. And the US is saying, no, other powers can't rise. No, new types of, economic and cultural systems are not allowed to rise and be successful, even though they are rising and being successful. I feel that the conflict, well, go ahead before I go any further. Go ahead, your thought.
Please. No,
I was going to say, I feel that the conflict in Ukraine is the impetus for a lot of things that's going on right now. That when the Russians said, no, you're on our border and we're not going to allow you to, continue to build on our border and threaten us, and they push back against imperialism in a way that no one really has, in quite a while. We have a major power saying, I'm going to pick up arms against an imperialist power. After the conflict started in Ukraine, I recall that there was an Africa summit where a number of African countries came to meet in Russia. Within weeks afterwards, they were throwing the French out. Then weeks afterwards, they were rejecting French imperialism. Your thoughts on the Ukraine conflict, and it's important in the context of the world anti-imperialist movement and the world conflict that these imperialist neocons, whatever you want to call them, are pursuing to try to maintain a world hegemony that they don't even have. Your thoughts?
Garland, the question of war is not only of theoretical significance, but it's a practical significance because war is all around us. Since the end of the Second World War, when there was so much devastation, with over 50 million people killed, even larger number wounded, a wholesale destruction of wealth of society, people said never again. And yet, within 5 years of the ending of that war, Americans were waging a war against the Korean people because the northern part had opted for socialism, and the Americans wanted to unite Korea under their dominance and getting rid of the communists. The 3-year war, which was then joined by their fraternal comrades from China, people's volunteers from China, they fought American imperialism to a standstill. And at the end of that, there was no peace, there was truce. So Korea has been really, if you like, in a state of semi-war since then. There's not actual shooting, but Americans conduct constant provocative flights on the border, and they're trying to provoke the DPRK, North Korea for easy abbreviation. They're doing that, and precisely for that reason, the North Koreans decided that there's only one way for them to meet with this, and that is to develop their own nuclear weapons. And they made some fantastic progress in the development of these weapons. So American imperialism will have to think several times over before it attacks North Korea. In fact, Madeleine Albright said, we attacked Saddam Hussein because he didn't have nuclear weapons. We don't attack North Korea because North Korea has nuclear weapons. So that's a perfectly good argument for countries that are in the crosshairs of imperialism having their own nuclear weapons. Not every one of these countries can have. For example, the Iranian state has been opposed ideologically to developing nuclear weapons. They've said that. And yet they're constantly accused of trying to develop nuclear weapons. When next door, Israel has got probably 100 to 200 nuclear weapons. No inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency go to inspect them, but they're constantly threatening Iran with extinction because they're supposed to be developing nuclear weapons. But the whole point is imperialism seeks domination. It does not seek liberation. It does not seek freedom. Lenin pointed that out long while ago. Everywhere imperialism seeks domination, both in its internal policy and in its external policy. Internally, you know better than I do, few large American corporations rule the country, and they own the economy of the country. Majority of the people have very little. Even if American people have better lives than people in Africa or Asia, all the same, relatively speaking, majority of the people are living in relative poverty. 40 million Americans have no health cover. How can you explain that? Tiny, poor Cuba has health cover for everybody, in spite of the sanctions that they have suffered ever since their republic came into being in 1950. And all the same, Americans don't have that. So imperialism is not into bringing liberation. It seeks domination. That's why when discussions take place, I get a bit annoyed. People say, they use ordinary human arguments. Can't Americans learn from their experience? Can't the imperialists learn from their experience? It's not a question of experience. Their drive to domination leads eventually to trade wars and sometimes ends in real shooting wars. It's the drive to domination. So when you actually try and analyze a war, whether the working people should support that war or not, you have to ask one fundamental question: the class character of the war. Which class is waging the war, and what was the policy it pursued before the war? Because war is nothing but a continuation of policy, continuation of politics that were pursued by the parties before the war. So just as the American corporations seek domination within the country, American imperialism on their behalf, seeks domination all over the world. Nothing less than satisfies. That's why they're constantly actually provoking every country. Every country, from big to small, is in their crosshairs if they don't go along with what America wants. After the last meeting between uh, President of China, Comrade Xi Jinping, and Joe Biden, it was considered that the American-Chinese relations were on the mend. And as soon as that has happened, first of all, Joe Biden insultingly calls Xi Jinping a dictator. Is that how statesmen in the countries behave? That you describe your opponent as a dictator and you want to negotiate with them? Secondly, they've just announced that after the Taiwan elections are over, America is sending a high-powered delegation to Taiwan. That's a provocation against China when the Chinese have made clear they do not want America to have official contacts with the Taiwanese government, because they quite rightly say it's our country. It's part of China. So although the Americans accepted one China policy when they established diplomatic relations in the 70s with China, they still continued to arm the people in Taiwan, not the people, but the government in Taiwan, as a bulwark against the People's Republic of China. And every journalist, they're so indecent and lacking in any intellectual honesty. They describe, whenever they mention Taiwan, which China regards as its province. No, China doesn't regard. America accepted that it was part of China. One China policy means precisely that. It's not Chinese who regard Taiwan as part of China. It is, historically speaking, part of China. And it only wasn't liberated by the People's Liberation Army because Chiang Kai-shek, having been beaten, ran to Taiwan and he got the support of the American naval fleets. That's what prevented its unification with the motherland and what prevents its unification now. The Chinese have behaved with tremendous dignity and restraint, but a time will come when they would not put up with that. So really, that's the position. The war in Ukraine is exactly the same. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine had no chance of fighting against Russia. Russians didn't want to fight this war. It's a war waged by NATO, using Ukrainian people as cannon fodder and proxies in order to have a regime change in Russia and to dismember Russia into smaller, easily digestible portions. That's what it is. They went there, being very confident that Russia would not last more than 6 weeks through the combination of economic sanctions and the weapons they would be supplying to Ukraine. All that has failed. And they thought Russia could not match arms production because they thought the whole industry had been gutted since the end of the Soviet Union. But the Russians have shown that all the gains, scientific gains that were made during the Soviet days are still there and they can be mobilized. And their war industry is producing far more than the combined forces of NATO can achieve, let alone Ukraine. So they're losing in Ukraine. 10 million people have left Ukraine since this conflict started, never to return again. Ukraine is finding very difficult to recruit people for the army. They are asking old people, they are asking women, they are asking pregnant women to go to the front. And one after the other, they are losing battles, from Bakhmut to number of other places. And Russians are in no hurry to make a sweeping attack on the Ukrainians. They are wearing down the Ukrainian army. And this is what is exactly happening. Likewise, in the Middle East, it's not the state armies. No Middle Eastern army has ever defeated Israel. but the non-state actors have. And General Gyap, whose book that you have just been reading, says that the key to victory is to wear down the will of the enemy to fight. And they are wearing down the will of their opponents. How long can Zionism continue to live in a state of armed conflict with the Palestinian people? You know, Palestinians have nowhere to go. So they will continue to fight, and they will wear down the will of the Israelis till the Zionists, even the thick Zionist skulls, get penetrated through by reality that it cannot be done, and come to an agreement, which in my view can only be a one-state solution where Jews, Christians, and Muslims can live together, you know, nobody lording over anyone else. If in those conditions, many of the Zionists don't want to stay in Palestine, well, that's their decision. But they've made one two-state solution impossible through the settlement activity that they've conducted in the West Bank. There are something like 700 settlements. So Palestine has become literally what South Africa was before its liberation, i.e. a Bantustan. It's dotted everywhere by little enclaves, which are occupied. The best land, the best positions, the hilltops are occupied by Zionist settlers who terrorize the Palestinians. There are roads which only the Jews can use. Non-Jews cannot use those roads. If a person is trying to reach the hospital, they have to stop for hours at a checkpoint, while the Israeli soldiers on the other side of the checkpoint are having a drink or playing cards or something, and every now and then they might let you in or not. And women have given birth at checkpoints because they could not reach the hospital in time. And sometimes their children are stillborn. That's the kind of cruelty that is being committed. And in Ukraine, of course, they're fighting against an opponent. So there is a real opponent to oppose them. But when they're fighting in Lebanon or when they're fighting in Gaza, they don't even have the honor of being good soldiers fighting against a powerful opponent. They are powerful in a different way, but they don't have the same weaponry. They don't have the Air Force. They don't have the Navy. They don't have the tanks, but they nevertheless are able to fight and give a good account of themselves. And I am absolutely certain it's a pity I won't be there to live and see their victory, but they will be victorious. You will see them.
Your thoughts on something that I've discussed a good bit, and that is the ruling elite in Europe. The U.S. basically has, come to the ruling elite. Take Germany, for instance, the U.K., and said, we want you to take actions that's going to destroy your economy, that's going to destroy your way of life, that's going to destroy the foundation of your job market, your industry, etc. The U.S. has attacked Germany. The ruling elite has simply said, it must have been some Ukrainians in a sailboat. The current state of the ruling elite in Europe and I don't know, is it an acquiescence to imperialism? Is it they don't answer to their constituents, they answer for the U.S. empire? But at any rate, there's obviously quisling governments here that are acting against the interest of the people in Europe. Your thoughts on that particular dynamic?
My own view is that if a slave is a slave because he's got shackles around his wrists and around his ankles, and you take the shackles off, he's a free man. But if you have colonized him mentally and he cannot think of being a free man, you can take the shackles off. He would not want to run away in those circumstances. In the special conditions created in the post-war, Second World War period, the Europeans lay prostrate. The only imperialist country that was powerful, whose economy has come out well from the war, was US imperialism. It was very powerful. It accounted at time for 45 to 50% of the global GDP. Today it's about 22, 23%. So it's come down considerably. The Europeans, although they have recovered economically with initial help of American imperialism, but of course not without any self-interest, because European imperialism bought a lot of American imperialism bought a lot of European industry, and they still own it. But they dare not revolt against America because somehow they still think Russia is a danger to them. Russia will come and invade. And there's a real dichotomy between, on the one hand, saying Russia is weak, Russia cannot do anything. On the other hand, it's so powerful that it come and invade the all of Europe. If you allow President Putin to win in Ukraine, the next in line are going to be the Baltic states and Poland. And once that is over, he'd come to Western Europe. These are just fairy tales designed to frighten weak hearts and various kinds of unthinking, if you like, untutored masses of people. It's not that. But who would destroy a good economic relationship with Russia, where German industry was based on German engineering prowess and cheap Russian energy? They've cut themselves off. As a result, there's a cost of living crisis in Germany. As a result, German industry is in a terrible state, and they're having to buy American liquefied natural gas at far higher prices. And the Biden is doing no favor to them. All kinds of legislation has been passed, the purpose of which is to force German industry to relocate to America. It will not take place. One of the chief characteristics of imperialism is export of capital. What was characteristic of free pre-monopoly capitalism was export of goods. But under imperialist conditions, it's not goods, it's capital that's exported. The imperialists, because there is too much capital in their homelands, take it abroad to set up productive facilities. And as a result, they've taken a lot of capital to China, they've taken capital to Vietnam, they've taken capital to India and many other places, because their chief purpose is not to provide employment to American workers. Their chief purpose is to make money, and they'll go wherever the money is. I say to my comrades sometimes, if you had some money and there were 4 banks and one was offering you 6% and the others 3 or 4%, where do you think you're going to put your money? Well, you're a communist, but you still go for 6%, wouldn't you? And the imperialists will do exactly the same. They go to these countries because land is cheap, the regulation is lax, the resources are in plentiful supply, so it's profitable for them to invest. Of course, there would be no surplus of capital if they could use that to improve the lives of people in their own countries. But capital is not in the business of improving lives. It's in the business of making super profits. It's in the business of making profits to the maximum, and that's what they're doing, and they will continue. I mean, war is inevitable under the conditions of imperialism, not because of anybody's evil designs, even of the capitalists, because the system drives them to it. Ever since, it's not coincidental that the monopoly stage of capitalism was reached at the same time when the whole world had become divided up. Not that there was nobody local living there. It was divided up between the imperialist powers. In the 1884-85 Berlin Conference, which was called by Germany, the various European statesmen sat around a table with the map of Africa and drew lines as to who we shall have. Tiny Belgium got the huge Congo as the Belgian king's personal patrimony. The biggest thieves, Britain and France, got the most, and then the upcoming thief, Germany, got much less. And that, of course, laid the basis for the First World War, because Germany, by the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, has become a formidable industrial power with a big financial system. And they felt cheated that they didn't have as many slaves as France and Britain had. They didn't have as many colonies to loot as Britain and France had. And they said, it's not fair. And from the exploiters' point of view, it's very unfair that Germany, which had become powerful, but its share in the loot, in the share in the colonies, was determined by the previous balance of forces prior to Germany's development. So uneven development of capitalism brought them to a stage where they had spurted ahead of France and Germany, and they wanted their fair share. Of course, the last time peaceful division took place was at the Berlin Congress, where there was no fight. They just made a gentleman's agreement. You can do this and that. But by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, it could not be done. All that could be divided had already been divided, and there could only be redivision. And the German imperialists had, to use Lenin's vivid expression, arrived too late at the banqueting table, when all the seats around the table had been taken up. Of course, if there's a dinner or party going on among comrades and one comrade turns up 2 hours late, those who've been sitting there, they say, oh, come on, Garland, you sit down, we've been having our meal, come and join. But that's not how affairs are settled in the world of capitalism. So the only way that newcomers could unseat the older, fat, imperialist powers was by knocking them off their position, to knocking them off their dining chairs. And that, of course, they did not want to leave, and led to the fisticuffs. And the First World War claimed the lives of at least 30 million people, if not more. A lot more wealth destroyed, a lot more people wounded. And of course, nobody knows the exact number, but 30 to 50 million killed through the influenza that struck the world in the aftermath of the First World War, because people, through a mixture of poverty and through having served in the armed forces, were very weak indeed. That's the price that people of the world had to pay for keeping this dirty system, which is long past its sell-by date alive. And that's what it was. But of course, they bargained too much for a good result. Instead of it simply resulting in the victory of the Anglo-French and to a certain extent American imperialism, which was only in the war for 90 last days of that war, it gave birth to the October Revolution. And they've never been able to overcome that shock. And 1/6 of the world was taken outside of the world market, outside of imperialist influence. And when they waged the Second World War to achieve a different result, to preserve their colonies, to keep their domination, it resulted not only in the victory of the Soviet Union in the great patriotic war, but it also gave birth to a whole socialist camp where Eastern and Central European powers, countries joined the socialist bloc. And there was not a country in Eastern and Central Europe where the red flag with its hammer and sickle sign did not fly proudly. What's more, the revolution spread to China, to Korea, to Vietnam. And so it became a world system, and it shook imperialism to its very, 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 very foundation. And of course, they thought, because America was the first to develop nuclear weapons, they could intimidate the world. But as long as the Soviet Union carried on with a revolutionary policy, they could not intimidate. And within 4 years, the Soviet Union had developed its own nuclear bomb. And they could never believe that the Soviet Union could do it, so thought somebody must have given them the information about how to produce it. So poor old Rosenbergs were done to death. They were executed for no other reason than that they were progressive-minded, first-class scientists. And if imperialism wages another war, the results would not be very much different from the previous ones, because the people of the world would get fed up with having to pay such heavy price every 10, 20, 30 years. In fact, they haven't really known any peace. When Europeans talk of peace and Americans talk of peace, which means is It was peace in their homelands. But there was no peace for the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. They had to fight very hard, and they continue to do so. And our position is a Leninist position. When imperialism wages war against oppressed people or against non-imperialist countries, we are on the side of the oppressed and the non-imperialist countries. We wish for the defeat of our own governments in that war, because to wish for anything else would be nothing short of opportunism. It would be nothing short of selling the interests of your own proletariat for the interests, the material interests of the ruling classes.
Harpal, Brar. Well, that's an hour, and I've really enjoyed it. I certainly appreciate it. And you're. By the way, I know you've written a number of books. Some of our listeners may want, and our viewers may want to know the name of your books and where they can find them. I know you've been a lot of them, so you don't have to go through all of them if you don't want, but at least a highlight real quick of some of the ones that you think people should get.
Well, I have written a book called Perestroika, The Complete Collapse of Revisionism, which deals with the reasons for the collapse of the Soviet Union. I've written a book, I think I probably posted a copy to you, Imperialism, Decadent, Moribund, Parasitic Imperialism. I've written another book on imperialism. I'm afraid my kids tease me that can I not think of another name than imperialism? It's called Imperialism, the Eve of the Social Revolution of the Proletariat. It's got a number of articles which may be of interest to you, and I'm going to get my comrades to post it to you. I know you're a very busy person, but every now and then you can read the odd article which you may find useful. And believe it or not, I've written a book on Zimbabwe's liberation struggle.
Wow.
I will again have it posted to you. It's called Chimurenga, the liberation war in Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwean comrades very much appreciated. President Mugabe did and said so at a congress of his party that I had the honor of being.
Go ahead. No, continue.
And I've written a short pamphlet of 200 pages on the liberation struggle in India. It's not a history of India. It's just on three important episodes in Indian history. I've written along with my comrade Ella Rule, Imperialism and the Middle East, and I've written a book called Imperialism in the Middle East. So there are a number of things, and of course the one that has upset the authorities and led to the rest of our comrades is this one. It's a short pamphlet. I never expected to be known by this. That's on the Labour Party. I've written a book on the Labour Party, which is called Social Democracy: The Enemy Within, and we have produced the first section of it in the new book that you got, the Perfidious Labour Party. So that's a sort of thing I've done, and they can get these books from our party's bookshop, which is called thecommunist.org, and if you go to the page, they tell you which books you can get and all the rest of it. And we're available on that. And we're very grateful for any information that comrades who get in touch with us would spread about these.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm working on People's Army, People's War, General Diop. I've got another book. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And it's called Fascism and Social Revolution. And that's my...
It's Rajini Parnadat. He was a very important person in the British Communist movement. He was a chief theoretician of the Communist Party of Great Britain, as it was then called. His father was an Indian of Indian origin, a doctor in England, and his mother came from a Swedish family, hence Palma. And I think he came from the same family as a former prime minister of Sweden, Palma, I can't remember his full name, and he was assassinated, and there was suspicion that he was far too progressive for the Americans, and they arranged for him to be dispatched rather prematurely to celestial spheres. So that book is excellent. You really should find the time to read it from cover to cover. It's very, very good. And it explains the basis of fascism, what fascism is, what exactly happens, and how could Hitler come to power. And, he could only come to power with the help of German industry, German imperialism. Because when they realized that the Social Democrats were losing influence among the working class and the Communist Party was gaining, then they switched their support to the fascists and gave the fascists a lot of material support and every other possible support they could. And of course, there was a lot of help from America and Britain, who are always, as freedom lovers, in favor of fascists of every kind.
Yes, thank you very much, Harpal, Brar. Certainly appreciate it, everyone. Don't forget, follow me if I can find it. I didn't put my little thing across the bottom here. There we go. You can follow me. Go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Just in case, for some reason, many of the things we said and that Harpal said and that I discussed today would be of ample concern to YouTube. And in case they decide one day that I shouldn't be on YouTube anymore, go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. All my videos are there. Anything they throw off, and including me, you can find it. Rockfin. That is a great alternative. Follow me on Telegram also, and see all of the stuff going by. Any way you can help the channel is certainly.
For the moment, you're secured so far as your conversation with me are concerned, because I'm such an insignificant character. They don't think I present any danger.
Well, I doubt that from the looks of what happened. One thing for sure, the literature that you produce seems to be of great concern to the imperialists, so much so that they're literally locking people up for trying to hand it out. Thanks a lot, Harpal, Brar. Certainly appreciate it. Certainly appreciate you taking great
thank you,
time.
Garland.
Yes, thank you. Have a wonderful day, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Garland Nixon here, and well, it's Friday, so I'm heading off to do my thing, the critical hour, etc. And you all have a wonderful evening. Please take your afternoon, evening, whatever, depends on what time of day it is where you live. And don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms. As you know, I've been thrown off of Twitter. I'm still on Telegram and Facebook and places like that. But make sure that you share this on all your social media platforms. Make sure you hit the like button. Maybe we can defeat the algorithm and 1 or 2 people can see this. Probably not, but let's give it a shot. Thank you very much. Peace. I'm out.